Ever notice that when someone asks you what you do, you start explaining your services, and somewhere in the middle of it, you feel like you're rambling? There are actually a few very specific patterns behind why that happens. And once you see them, it becomes much easier to explain what you actually do. Because the frustrating part is your work helps people, you've helped clients, you've gotten results. But when you try to explain what you do out loud, it just doesn't land the way you want it to. And this is something I see all the time when I'm working with service providers who want more consistent cash and clients in their business. Honestly, it's not because they don't know what to do. It's because three parts of their offer aren't fully clear yet. Let's simplify this. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through three patterns I see all the time when working with clients and how to start simplifying them. Here's what we're going to look at. The first is when the problem you solve isn't simplified yet. The second is when you're trying to speak to too many different stages of clients. And the third is when you start explaining how your program works instead of the problem it solves. And as we go through them, we're going to take this one layer deeper each time. So the next time you talk about your services, it's much easier for someone to understand what exactly you do. Pattern one. The problem isn't simplified yet. The first pattern I see is when someone starts explaining how they help instead of the problem they actually solve. So the explanation starts sounding something like this. They start describing the method, the philosophy, the approach, all the different pieces of their process. And the listener or potential client is trying to figure out one simple thing. What problem does this person actually help me solve? For example, I worked with someone who helped professionals pass a certification exam. When they first explained their work, they talked about their teaching style, their study frameworks, and the different resources they provided. But when we simplified the message, it became much clearer. They help professionals pass the certification exam they need for their career. Now, all the other pieces made sense because those things weren't the problem. They were how the problem gets solved. So a useful question to ask yourself is this: what problem is my client trying to solve right now? Now, once the problem becomes clearer, the next place we can go a little deeper is this. Even when someone knows the problem they help solve, their messaging can still feel scattered, and that usually happens when they're trying to speak to too many different stages of clients at once, which leads us to pattern two. You're speaking to too many stages of clients. Another pattern I see a lot is when someone is trying to speak to every possible person who might eventually need their service. I worked with a client who offered a certification program for professionals in a very specialized field. The people who benefited most from their program were already established in their career and were ready to specialize. But when we started looking at how they talked about their offer, they kept asking questions like, well, what about the person who's just starting out? What about someone who might want to specialize someday? What about someone who's still figuring out their direction? And the message kept stretching further and further out. So we stepped back and mapped out the journey of the people in that profession. And one thing became very clear. The people most likely to buy that program were the ones who were already deciding they wanted to specialize, not the ones who were still figuring things out. So we simplified the question. Who is already trying to solve this problem right now? Because when your message speaks to the person who is ready now, something shifts. Your message gets clearer, your conversations get easier, and the people who are already looking for help start recognizing themselves in what you're saying. Now, when both of those things become clearer, the problem and the stage of the client you're speaking to, there's one more place where messaging can still start to feel confusing. And it usually shows up when someone starts explaining how their service works before the listener understands the problem. This leads us to pattern number three, describing the container instead of the problem. The third pattern I see is when someone starts explaining the structure of their service instead of the problem it solves. Now, The explanation starts sounding something like this. Well, I have a group program, and there's a private community, and they might even add, and we meet once a week, and there are different modules, and the explanation keeps getting longer and longer and longer. But the person listening is still wondering one thing. You guessed it. Okay, but what problem does this actually help me solve? People don't need to understand the structure of your program first. They need to understand whether you can help them solve the problem they're dealing with right now. Once the problem is clear, the container becomes much easier to explain because now the container simply becomes how the solution is delivered. If you start looking at your offer through these three lenses, the problem you solve, the stage of the client you're speaking to, and how your solution is delivered, you'll usually find the place where your message can start becoming much simpler. And when your message becomes simpler, it becomes much easier for people to understand why they should work with you. Now, if you want help walking through this process inside your own business, that's exactly what we do inside Cash and Clients Without Chaos. It's a 90-day one-on-one consulting container where we simplify your offer, strengthen your messaging, and build a customized client acquisition process designed to bring in more consistent cash and clients without burning out.